An ambulance fights the storm, racing to save a life on a deserted road. In the middle of the road, a cat and a dog stop the route, acting as if they wanted to say something. A mysterious figure appears between the trees, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. What seemed like an ordinary night turns into a puzzle that will challenge all limits of the unexpected. The rain fell relentlessly on the winding road that snaked through the outskirts of Springfield. The leaden grey sky seemed to merge with the wet asphalt, creating a gloomy and desolate landscape. In the midst of this inhospitable scene, an ambulance advanced with difficulty, its emergency lights flashing in the gloom of the autumn afternoon. Inside the vehicle, Rick, the weathered-faced driver with firm hands on the wheel, struggled to maintain control on the slippery road. Beside him, the nurse Sarah, a woman in her 30s with lively eyes and dark hair tied back in a ponytail, frantically reviewed the data of the patient they were heading towards. "Come on, Rick, hurry up," Sarah exclaimed, her voice tinged with urgency. "The case is critical, every minute counts." From the back of the ambulance, Jack, the paramedic, a young man with an athletic build and determined gaze, leaned forward to add, "According to the report, it's a possible heart attack case. We need to get there as soon as possible." Rick nodded, gritting his teeth as he accelerated slightly, aware of the danger posed by the wet road. Suddenly his eyes widened, and he slammed on the brakes with all his might. "Oh my God!" Sarah cried, clinging to the dashboard as the ambulance came to an abrupt stop. In the middle of the road, illuminated by the vehicle's headlights, a dog and a cat blocked their path. The dog, medium-sized with unkempt brown fur, sat firmly, its eyes fixed on the ambulance. Beside it, a black and white cat moved nervously, meowing and running in circles. "What the hell?" Rick muttered, incredulous at the scene. Sarah, recovering from the shock, opened the ambulance door and jumped out, determined to move the animals off the road. However, as she approached, something in the animal's behavior made her pause. "Jack, come see this," she called to her partner, without taking her eyes off the animals. The paramedic joined her in the rain, watching curiously. "It's strange," he commented. "It's as if they're trying to tell us something." At that moment, a movement among the nearby trees caught their attention. A female figure, barely visible in the darkness, seemed to emerge from nowhere. Sarah squinted, trying to make out her features, but as quickly as she appeared, the mysterious woman vanished into the vegetation. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack nodded, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Yes, but where did she go?" Before they could investigate further, the cat began to meow more loudly, running towards some nearby bushes. Moved by an impulse she couldn't explain, Sarah decided to follow it. "Sarah, wait!" Jack shouted, following her closely. What they found among the vegetation left them breathless. Lying on the ground, soaked and apparently unconscious, was an old man. His pale, wrinkled face contrasted with the mud surrounding him. "Quick, Jack! Help me get him to the ambulance," Sarah exclaimed, already kneeling beside the man. As they hurried to attend to the old man, Rick approached, holding something in his hand. "Look what I found near where the gentleman was," he said, showing them a silver bracelet with a rose-shaped charm. "And there are strange tire marks in the mud, as if someone had suddenly braked and then accelerated." Sarah and Jack exchanged worried looks as they lifted the old man into the ambulance. To their surprise, the dog and cat jumped into the vehicle after them, refusing to leave the man. "Get out of here!" Rick tried to shoo them away, but the animals stood firm, as if they understood the gravity of the situation. Already on their way to the hospital, the old man began to mumble deliriously. "The secret, the family, betrayal." His words were disjointed, but Sarah noticed how the animals seemed to react to them, especially when he mentioned a name: Emily. Upon arriving at the hospital, they were greeted by Dr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with glasses and an impeccable white coat. His professional expression transformed into one of irritation when he saw the animals. "What is the meaning of this? Animals cannot enter the hospital," he exclaimed. However, before anyone could respond, the cat jumped from the stretcher and ran down the hall. To everyone's amazement, it stopped in front of a supply closet, scratching at the door and meowing insistently. Dr. Thompson, intrigued despite his initial annoyance, opened the closet. His eyes widened at the contents. "Incredible! This is exactly the medication we need for the patient's initial treatment. How is this possible?" As the medical team rushed to attend to the old man, now identified as Mr. Franklin, a new figure appeared in the hospital reception. A tall man in a dark suit with a penetrating gaze approached the counter. "Good evening," he said in a deep and slightly threatening voice. "I'm looking for Frank Franklin. I'm Nathan, his nephew." At that precise moment, the dog, which had remained close to Mr. Franklin's stretcher, began to growl menacingly, its eyes fixed on the newcomer. Sarah, Jack, and Rick exchanged bewildered looks. Who was this man, really? And why did the animals seem to distrust him so much? The night was just beginning, and with it, a mystery that promised to shake the foundations of the hospital and the lives of everyone involved. The dim light of dawn filtered through the windows of Springfield General Hospital, weakly illuminating the corridors where the night shift staff prepared for the changing of the guard. In room 301, Mr. Franklin lay unconscious, connected to multiple machines, monitoring his vital signs. At the foot of his bed, Buddy dozed restlessly, while Whiskers watched attentively from the windowsill. Sarah entered the room silently, her face showing signs of fatigue after a night of vigilance. She approached the bed, checking the monitors and adjusting the IV. Suddenly, Mr. Franklin stirred, his eyes opening slowly. Where am I?" he mumbled in a hoarse voice. "You're in the hospital, Mr. Franklin," Sarah replied softly. "We found you unconscious on the road. Do you remember anything that happened?" The old man frowned, struggling to remember. I was driving, then a blinding light, and after that, nothing." At that moment, Dr. Thompson entered the room, followed closely by Jack. "Good morning, Mr. Franklin. I'm Dr. Thompson. You've suffered an unusual stroke. Fortunately, we found you in time." While the doctor explained Mr. Franklin's condition, Nathan appeared at the door, his presence causing Buddy to stand up, the hair on his back bristling. "Uncle Frank," Nathan said, ignoring the dog's reaction, "what a relief to see you awake." Mr. Franklin looked at Nathan with a mixture of confusion and what seemed like fear. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" "I'm your family, Uncle." "Where else would I be?" Nathan replied, his voice soft but with a tone that made Sarah involuntarily shudder. Dr. Thompson, noticing the tension in the room, intervened. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Franklin needs to rest. I ask that you all step out for a moment." As everyone was leaving, Sarah noticed that Whiskers jumped from the window and scurried down the hallway. Intrigued, she decided to follow him. The cat led her to Dr. Thompson's office, where it stopped in front of a filing cabinet. Sarah, looking around to make sure no one was watching, opened the drawer. Inside, she found an old file with the name Franklin Frank. With trembling hands, she opened the file. Her eyes widened as she read its contents. "It can't be," she whispered. Back in the hallway, Jack found himself face to face with Nathan. "Excuse me," said the paramedic, "but I couldn't help noticing Mr. Franklin's reaction when he saw you. Are you sure you're family?" Nathan smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Of course. My uncle has been confused lately. It's part of his condition." Meanwhile, in the hospital cafeteria, Rick was sharing a coffee with Emily, the mysterious woman they had briefly seen on the road and who now claimed to have been the one who called the ambulance. "How did you know Mr. Franklin needed help?" Rick asked, skeptical. Emily lowered her gaze, nervously fiddling with a ring on her finger. "It's complicated. Let's just say I have a connection with Mr. Franklin that goes beyond what you can imagine." Suddenly, a commotion in the hallway attracted everyone's attention. Sarah was running, holding some papers, with Whiskers hot on her heels. "Jack! Rick! You need to see this!" But before she could reach them, Nathan appeared, blocking her path. "I believe those documents belong to me," he said, extending his hand. Sarah stepped back, protecting the papers. "This is confidential hospital information. I can't give it to you." The tension in the air was palpable. Buddy appeared out of nowhere, growling threateningly at Nathan. Emily, observing the scene, visibly paled. At that moment, a heart-wrenching scream echoed throughout the hospital. It came from Mr. Franklin's room. Everyone looked at each other, fear and confusion evident on their faces. What secrets was Mr. Franklin hiding? Who was Nathan, really? And what role did Emily play in all of this? As they ran towards room 301, no one noticed that the bracelet Rick had found on the road was glowing mysteriously in his uniform pocket, as if it had a life of its own. The mystery was just beginning to unfold, and the lives of everyone present were about to change forever. The scream that echoed through the hospital corridors chilled the blood of everyone present. Sarah, Jack, Rick, Nathan, and Emily ran towards room 301, closely followed by Buddy and Whiskers. Upon arrival, they found Mr. Franklin sitting up in his bed, his eyes wide and sweat beading on his forehead. Dr. Thompson was already at his side, trying to calm him down. "The photo! I must find the photo!" Mr. Franklin shouted, attempting to get up. "Please, Mr. Franklin, you need to calm down," Dr. Thompson insisted, struggling to keep the old man in bed. Sarah quickly approached, helping the doctor. "Mr. Franklin, what photo are you talking about?" The old man looked at her, his eyes full of desperation. "The photo, the proof. It's in—" Before he could finish the sentence, Nathan intervened. "Uncle, you're delirious. You need to rest." Mr. Franklin seemed to shrink at Nathan's presence, but his eyes lit up when he saw Emily at the door. "How, you're identical to her." Emily took a step forward, visibly moved. "Mr. Franklin, Enough!" Dr. Thompson exclaimed. "Everyone out. My patient needs peace and quiet." Reluctantly, everyone left the room, except for Buddy and Whiskers, who refused to move from the foot of Mr. Franklin's bed. In the hallway, the tension was palpable. Jack turned to Emily. "I think it's time you explain who you really are and what relationship you have with Mr. Franklin." Emily sighed deeply, looking around nervously. "My full name is Emily Franklin. I'm Mr. Franklin's granddaughter." A stunned silence followed her declaration. "That's impossible," Nathan interjected, his voice cold. "Frank never had children." "That's what everyone believes," Emily replied defiantly. "But the truth is much more complicated." Sarah, who had been observing in silence, spoke up. "The documents I found, they mention a daughter of Mr. Franklin, a daughter who supposedly died years ago." Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. "My mother. Everyone believed she had died in an accident, but the truth is she had to go into hiding. Someone wanted to silence her." Rick, who had been unusually quiet, took the bracelet out of his pocket. "Does this have anything to do with all of this?" he asked, showing it. Emily's eyes widened at the sight of the jewel. "My grandmother's bracelet! Where did you find it?" "Near where we found Mr. Franklin," Rick replied. Nathan tried to snatch the bracelet, but Buddy, who had silently left the room, growled menacingly, stopping his advance. At that moment, Dr. Thompson came out of Mr. Franklin's room, his face showing concern. "His condition is stable, but there's something else. His test results show traces of a strange substance in his blood. I think someone may have tried to poison him." The revelation fell like a bomb among those present. Jack, acting on instinct, stepped between Nathan and the group. "I think we all have many questions to ask, especially you, Mr. Nathan." Nathan, maintaining his composure, smiled coldly. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a respectable businessman and Frank Franklin's only living relative." "That's not true," a voice intervened from the end of the hallway. Everyone turned to see an older nurse with graying hair and a determined look. "My name is Margaret, and I was Mr. Franklin's wife's personal nurse years ago. I know the whole truth about the Franklin family." Whiskers, who had been observing the entire scene, suddenly jumped and scratched at Nathan's jacket pocket. An envelope fell to the floor, scattering several old photos. Emily gasped when she saw them. "That's my mother, and that's a young Mr. Franklin." As everyone leaned in to look at the photos, no one noticed Nathan slowly backing away towards the exit. But Buddy did notice, and with a bark, he alerted the others. "He's getting away!" Jack shouted, launching into pursuit of Nathan. Chaos erupted in the hospital. Nurses and patients watched in astonishment as Jack and Rick chased Nathan through the corridors, while Sarah and Emily hurriedly collected the photos. Margaret, the older nurse, approached Sarah. "Girl, there's a lot you don't know about the Franklin family. Tragedies, secrets, and a fortune that many covet. But the most important thing is to protect Mr. Franklin and Emily." As the chase continued and revelations accumulated, no one noticed that the bracelet in Emily's hands began to glow with a strange light, as if it were about to reveal its own secret. The hospital, which hours before had been a place of calm and healing, had become the stage for a family drama full of mysteries to solve and truths to uncover. The pursuit of Nathan through the hospital corridors ended abruptly when the man crashed into a cleaning cart, falling spectacularly to the floor. Jack and Rick quickly caught up with him, holding him down as he tried to get up. "Let me go. You have no right to treat me like this," Nathan shouted, struggling. "Maybe not," Jack replied firmly, "but we have a lot of questions that need answers." Meanwhile, in the hallway in front of Mr. Franklin's room, Sarah, Emily, and Margaret were examining the fallen photographs. "This must be your mother," said Sarah, pointing to a smiling young woman next to Mr. Franklin. "The resemblance is amazing." Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, it's her, Lucy Franklin. She died when I was very young, or at least that's what I believed until recently." Margaret, the older nurse, took one of the photos with trembling hands. "I remember this day. It was the last time I saw Lucy alive, or so we all thought." At that moment, Dr. Thompson came out of Mr. Franklin's room, his face showing concern. "His blood pressure is rising. All this commotion isn't doing him any good." Emily turned to the doctor, determined. "I need to see him. Maybe if he recognizes me, he'll calm down." Dr. Thompson hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. "All right, but only for a few minutes." As Emily entered the room, Jack and Rick returned, escorting a visibly annoyed Nathan. "What do we do with him?" Rick asked. "Let's take him to Dr. Thompson's office," Sarah suggested. "We need to clear up a lot of things." In the room, Emily approached Mr. Franklin's bed timidly. The old man looked at her, his eyes clouded by confusion and medication. "Lucy?" he murmured weakly. "Is that you, my girl?" Emily took his hand, holding back tears. "No, Grandpa. I'm Emily, Lucy's daughter, your granddaughter, Mr. Franklin's eyes widened, a spark of recognition shining in them. "Emily? But how?" Before he could continue, Buddy, who had remained by the bed, began to bark insistently. Whiskers, who was on the windowsill, jumped to the floor and ran towards the door. "What's wrong with them?" Emily asked, alarmed. At that moment, the door burst open. A middle-aged woman with an astonishing resemblance to Emily but older entered the room. "Dad!" the newcomer exclaimed, running towards the bed. Mr. Franklin seemed to wake up completely from his stupor. "Lucy, is it really you?" Emily stood paralyzed, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Mom?" In Dr. Thompson's office, the tension was palpable. Nathan, seated in front of the desk, maintained a facade of calm, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. "Well," Sarah began, "it's time for you to tell us the truth. Who are you really, and what do you want from Mr. Franklin?" Nathan smiled bitterly. "The truth? Do you really want to know it? I'm the son that Frank Franklin never wanted to acknowledge." A stunned silence followed his declaration. "That's impossible," Margaret interjected. "I've known the Franklin family for decades and never—" "Never what?" Nathan interrupted, his voice filled with bitterness. "Never knew about the bastard's son, product of an affair that the respectable Mr. Franklin wanted to hide?" Before anyone could respond, a commotion was heard coming from Mr. Franklin's room. They all rushed there, encountering the scene of Lucy embracing her father while Emily watched, stunned. "What's going on here?" Dr. Thompson demanded. Lucy turned to them, her eyes full of tears but her posture firm. "I've been hiding for years, protecting my daughter and my father, but no more. It's time for the truth to come to light." Nathan, who had entered behind the others, paled at the sight of Lucy. You were supposed to be dead. And you," Lucy replied coldly, "were supposed to be trustworthy. But you tried to kill our father." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Mr. Franklin, regaining strength, sat up in bed. "It's time to tell the whole story," the old man said. "About the family business, the accident that wasn't an accident, and the secret that has divided our family for decades." As everyone prepared to hear the truth, the bracelet in Emily's pocket began to glow intensely, as if it were about to reveal its own secret. The hospital, a silent witness to so many human dramas, was preparing to be the stage for a revelation that would forever change the lives of the Franklin family and everyone involved in this story of love, betrayal, and redemption. The hospital room fell into a tense silence as everyone present prepared to hear Mr. Franklin's story. The old man, with renewed strength, adjusted himself in the bed, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces surrounding him. "It all began 40 years ago," Mr. Franklin started, his voice heavy with emotion. "Our family business, Franklin Imports, was at its peak. I was young, ambitious, and I made mistakes." Lucy took her father's hand, encouraging him to continue. I had an affair with one of the employees, Elena, Mr. Franklin continued, glancing at Nathan. Nathan was born from that relationship, but instead of facing my responsibilities, I chose the cowardly path. I paid Elena to leave, to keep the secret. Nathan clenched his fists, his eyes shining with a mixture of pain and contained rage. Years later, Mr. Franklin went on, I discovered that the company was involved in illegal activities, imports that served as a front for smuggling. It wasn't me who started it, but my partner and best friend, Robert Vance. Upon hearing that name, Margaret, the older nurse, let out a gasp. Robert, he was Lucy's godfather. Mr. Franklin nodded gravely. When I discovered the truth, I confronted Robert. I threatened to expose him. That's when Lucy's accident occurred. Emily, who had been listening in silence, interjected, What accident? Lucy took over, her voice trembling slightly. The car I was traveling in lost its brakes on a mountain road. Miraculously, I survived, but when I woke up in the hospital, Dad told me I had to disappear, that my life was in danger. I hid you, Mr. Franklin continued, gave you a new identity, and to protect you even more, we decided that the world should believe you had died. Sarah, who had been listening attentively, asked, But what does Nathan have to do with all this? Mr. Franklin lowered his gaze, ashamed. A few years ago, Nathan discovered the truth about his origin. He approached me, seeking answers and recognition. In my guilt and desire to make amends for my mistakes, I included him in the company, gave him a position of trust. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. Yes, a position of trust, but never public recognition as your son. I was always the dirty secret you wanted to keep hidden. And that's when you discovered Robert's old illegal dealings, Lucy added, looking at Nathan with a mixture of compassion and accusation. Nathan stood up, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. I didn't know. When I found those old documents, I thought Mr. Franklin had been responsible for everything. I thought he deserved to pay for abandoning me, for denying me my inheritance. So you tried to poison him, Jack concluded, his voice laden with reproach. No, Nathan exclaimed. I just wanted to scare him, make him confess. I never meant to. At that moment, the bracelet in Emily's pocket began to glow with such intensity that it illuminated the entire room. Surprised, the young woman took it out, observing it with amazement. That bracelet, Mr. Franklin murmured, his eyes widening. It was your grandmother's, Emily. It has a secret compartment. With trembling hands, Emily manipulated the jewel until, with a soft click, a small compartment opened. Inside was a microchip. My God, Lucy exclaimed, it's the proof. The proof that incriminates Robert Vance in all the illegal activities. Dr. Thompson, who had been observing everything in silence, intervened. I think we should call the authorities. This goes beyond family drama. As Jack left to make the call, Nathan collapsed into a chair, defeated. I'm sorry, he muttered. I'm so sorry. I was so blinded by resentment that I didn't see the truth. Mr. Franklin extended his hand towards him. I'm sorry too, son. I should have been brave many years ago. Perhaps then none of this would have happened. Emily and Lucy embraced, tears of relief and emotion running down their cheeks. Buddy and Whiskers, as if sensing that the danger had passed, curled up together at the foot of the bed. Sarah, observing the scene, couldn't help but feel that, despite all the pain and secrets, this family had a chance to heal, to start anew. But as the truth came to light and wounds began to close, no one noticed the shadowy figure observing from the hallway, through the half-open door. Robert Vance, the true villain of this story, had arrived at the hospital, and his eyes shone with a cold and dangerous determination. The truth had been revealed, but the danger was far from over. Night had fallen over Springfield General Hospital, enveloping the building in a veil of apparent calm. However, inside room 301, the tension was palpable as the Franklin family and their improvised allies processed the recent revelations. Robert Vance, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, listened with growing anger to every word. His plans, carefully woven over decades, were about to crumble. Stealthily, he moved away from the door, his mind concocting a desperate plan. Inside the room, Dr. Thompson was examining Mr. Franklin. Your blood pressure has stabilized, but you need rest, he warned, looking meaningfully at those present. Sarah, taking the initiative, suggested, "We should take turns keeping watch. We don't know if Robert Vance might try something." Jack nodded, adding, "I've spoken with the police. They'll come in the morning to take statements and secure the evidence from the microchip." Nathan, still visibly affected by the events, stood up. I'll take the first watch. It's the least I can do to start making amends for my mistakes." Lucy looked at him with a mixture of compassion and caution. "I'll accompany you. I think we have a lot to talk about, brother." As the others prepared to retire and rest in nearby waiting rooms, Emily approached her grandfather's bed. "Grandpa, there's something I don't understand. How did the bracelet end up on the road where they found you?" Mr. Franklin smiled weakly. "Ah, my dear, that bracelet has been my lucky charm for years. I was wearing it the day Robert tried to silence me once and for all." An overwhelming silence fell over the room. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, approaching. "Robert discovered that I knew the truth about his illegal business," Mr. Franklin explained. "He summoned me to that lonely road, supposedly to reach an agreement, but in reality he planned to get rid of me. If it weren't for Buddy and Whiskers," as if understanding they were being talked about, both animals raised their heads, alert. "Those brave animals appeared out of nowhere," Mr. Franklin continued. "They distracted Robert long enough for me to escape, but in the confusion I suffered an attack and lost consciousness. I must have dropped the bracelet at that moment." Rick, who had been listening in silence, interjected, "That explains the tire marks we found. They must have been from Robert's car when he fled." As the conversation continued in the hallway, Robert Vance was stealthily sliding towards the hospital pharmacy. With the skill of years of illicit activities, he forced the lock and entered. His eyes scanned the shelves until he found what he was looking for, a powerful sedative. Back in the room, the group was organizing for the night. Sarah and Jack decided to keep watch in the hallway, while Emily stayed with her grandfather. Rick and Dr. Thompson retired to rest, promising to return in a few hours for the next shift. At midnight, the hospital was plunged into an unsettling silence. Nathan and Lucy, seated in a small nearby waiting room, spoke in low voices, trying to rebuild family ties broken by years of secrets and lies. "I never really wanted to hurt him," Nathan confessed, his voice breaking. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain I felt all my life." Lucy took his hand, her eyes full of understanding. "Resentment is a poison that consumes us from within, but it's never too late to forgive and be forgiven." At that moment, a subtle noise caught Buddy's attention. The dog stood up, his ears erect, and a low growl in his throat. Whiskers, alerted by his companion, jumped to the windowsill, his green eyes scrutinizing the darkness outside. Sarah, noticing the animal's behavior, became alert. "Jack," she whispered, "I think something's not right." Before Jack could respond, the hallway lights flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. A muffled scream broke the silence, followed by the sound of breaking glass. When the emergency lights came on, they revealed a chaotic scene. The door to Mr. Franklin's room was wide open, and on the floor lay a broken vial, its contents spilled. Emily, pale and trembling, came out into the hallway. "Grandpa! They've taken Grandpa!" Panic seized everyone as the reality of the situation sank in. Robert Vance had made his move, and Mr. Franklin was in grave danger. As Jack ran to sound the alarm and Sarah tried to calm Emily, Buddy and Whiskers launched themselves down the hallway, following a trail invisible to humans. The race against time had begun, and the outcome of this family story was about to be written in the nocturnal streets of Springfield. The stillness of the Springfield night was suddenly interrupted by the sound of sirens and the flashing of emergency lights. Springfield General Hospital had become a hive of activity, with security personnel and police officers running through the corridors. Sarah, Jack, and Rick quickly gathered in the hospital parking lot, where Buddy and Whiskers were barking and meowing frantically next to an unknown car. "Look!" Rick exclaimed, pointing to fresh tire marks on the asphalt. "They must have left in a hurry." Jack, taking the lead, addressed his companions. "We can't wait for the police. Every minute counts. Sarah, you and I will go in the ambulance. Rick, stay here and coordinate with the authorities when they arrive." Without wasting a second, they climbed into the ambulance. To everyone's surprise, Buddy and Whiskers jumped into the vehicle before they could close the doors. "Looks like we have guides," Sarah commented as Jack started the engine. Meanwhile, in a car speeding away through the deserted streets of Springfield, Robert Vance nervously glanced in the rearview mirror. Beside him, Mr. Franklin lay unconscious, victim of the powerful sedative. "It's all over, old friend," Robert muttered bitterly. "But if I fall, you'll fall with me." Back at the hospital, Lucy and Nathan faced the cruel reality of the situation. "This is all my fault," Nathan exclaimed, hitting the wall in frustration. "If I hadn't been so blind, so resentful—" Lucy grabbed his arm, her voice firm but compassionate. "Now is not the time for regrets. We must act. I know Robert. I know how he thinks. I think I know where he might have taken Dad." Without wasting time, they both headed for Nathan's car, determined to join the search. The ambulance raced through the streets of Springfield at full speed, sirens off to avoid alerting Robert. Surprisingly, Buddy and Whiskers seemed to be indicating the way, barking and meowing every time they reached an intersection. "It's incredible," Sarah commented, observing the animals. "It's as if they really know where we're going." Jack, focused on the road, nodded. "After everything we've seen, nothing surprises me anymore. These animals have a special connection with Mr. Franklin." Suddenly, Buddy started barking more intensely. In the distance, they could make out the taillights of a car speeding away. "There they are," Jack exclaimed, stepping on the accelerator. The chase led them to the outskirts of the city, towards an abandoned industrial area. Robert's car turned sharply, entering a complex of old warehouses. "Watch out!" Sarah shouted, as they saw Robert trying to block their path with his vehicle. Jack skillfully maneuvered, avoiding the collision by inches. Robert's car skidded and crashed into a pile of old boxes. Taking advantage of the confusion, Robert got out of the vehicle, dragging a semi-conscious Mr. Franklin. "Stop!" Jack shouted, jumping out of the ambulance with Sarah hot on his heels. But Robert, desperate and dangerous, pulled a gun from his jacket. "Back off," he threatened, using Mr. Franklin as a shield. "One more step and the old man pays for it." The tension was palpable. Jack and Sarah stopped, assessing the situation. Buddy growled menacingly, while Whiskers slipped into the shadows, disappearing from sight. "Robert, please," Sarah tried to reason. "Don't make things worse. Turn yourself in and we can talk." Robert let out a bitter laugh. "Talk? It's too late for that. 30 years of business, of building an empire in the shadows, and all because of this stubborn old man and his damned morals." Mr. Franklin, slowly regaining consciousness, spoke in a weak voice. "Robert, old friend, there's still time to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Robert spat. "The right thing was for you to keep quiet, to accept your share of the profits and live a life of luxury. But no, you had to be the hero." As Robert continued his diatribe, no one noticed that Whiskers had positioned himself atop a stack of boxes right behind him. With a sharp meow, the cat leaped, landing on Robert's head. The surprise made Robert release Mr. Franklin and lose control of the gun. Buddy, seizing the opportunity, launched himself at him, knocking him down. Jack and Sarah ran towards Mr. Franklin, getting him to safety, while Robert struggled on the ground, overwhelmed by Buddy's ferocity and Whiskers' agility. At that precise moment, the lights of several vehicles illuminated the scene. Lucy and Nathan had arrived, closely followed by police patrol cars. "Dad!" Lucy shouted, running towards Mr. Franklin. As the police subdued a defeated Robert, the Franklin family reunited in an emotional embrace. Nathan, keeping a respectful distance, observed the scene with a mixture of relief and remorse. Mr. Franklin, still weak but conscious, looked around and smiled. "My family, all together at last." He extended his hand towards Nathan, inviting him to join the embrace. With tears in his eyes, Nathan stepped forward, being received into the family circle. Sarah and Jack, observing the scene, exchanged looks of satisfaction. Buddy and Whiskers, as if sensing their mission was accomplished, curled up together, exhausted but content. The night had been long and full of dangers, but at last the truth had come to light, and family bonds, though wounded, were beginning to heal. However, as the first lights of dawn tinged the Springfield sky, no one suspected that this adventure was far from over. A new chapter in the life of the Franklins was about to begin, one that would test their newly discovered family unity in ways none of them could imagine. The days following the dramatic rescue of Mr. Franklin were a whirlwind of activity. Springfield General Hospital had become the center of media attention, with journalists camping at the entrance, eager to obtain any information about the scandal involving one of the city's most prominent families. Inside room 301, now guarded by police officers, the Franklin family was trying to process everything that had happened and plan for their future. Mr. Franklin, now recovered from the sedative and with his health improving day by day, gazed thoughtfully out the window. A lifetime building a legacy, and I almost lost it all because of secrets and lies. Lucy, seated beside him, took his hand. But you didn't lose it, Dad. We're here, together. And now stronger than ever. Nathan, who had been standing in a corner of the room, approached timidly. Mr. Franklin, Dad, he began, still unsure how to address him. I know my actions are unforgivable, but I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends for my mistakes. Mr. Franklin looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. My son, forgiveness is a long road, but I'm willing to walk it with you. We've all made mistakes, myself first and foremost. Emily, who had been listening silently, spoke up. Grandpa, what will happen now with the company, with Robert in jail and all these revelations? Mr. Franklin sighed deeply. Good question, my dear. Franklin Imports needs a complete overhaul. We need to clean up its name and rebuild it from scratch, with transparency and ethics. At that moment, Sarah and Jack entered the room, followed closely by Buddy and Whiskers, who seemed to have become honorary residents of the hospital. Excuse the interruption, Sarah began, but we've been thinking about how we can contribute beyond what we've already done. Jack continued. We want to establish a foundation, one dedicated to helping victims of corruption and promoting transparency in the health sector. The proposal was met with enthusiasm by everyone. Mr. Franklin, with tears in his eyes, embraced the couple. You've been a blessing to this family. Of course you have all our support. As they discussed the details of the foundation, Nathan approached his father timidly. I've been thinking, maybe it's time to change the company's name. A new beginning, a new legacy. Mr. Franklin looked at his newly acknowledged son, a proud smile on his face. You're right. And I think I know exactly what name to use. Weeks later, the city of Springfield witnessed the inauguration of Franklin and Family Ethical Imports, a name that reflected not only the company's new focus, but also the union of a once fractured family. The launch event was a celebration of rebirth and hope. Reform-minded politicians, community leaders, and ordinary citizens gathered to witness the beginning of a new era for Springfield. During his speech, Mr. Franklin surprised everyone by announcing his retirement. It's time for the new generation to take the reins, he declared, looking proudly at Lucy, Nathan, and Emily. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. At the end of the event, Margaret approached the family with an old box. I think it's time you knew the whole truth, she said, opening the box to reveal yellowed photos and letters. Tears ran down Margaret's face as she explained, Lucy, Nathan, your grandmother, Mr. Franklin's wife, was my sister. I am your aunt. The revelation left everyone speechless. Decades of secrets and hidden connections finally came to light, completing the family puzzle. That night, gathered on the terrace of the family home, the now extended Franklin family reflected on their journey. Who would have thought it would all start with an emergency call and two mysterious animals? Jack commented, petting Buddy. Emily, holding her great-grandmother's bracelet, noticed it was glowing with an intensity never seen before. I think we've finally honored Grandma's legacy, she said softly. Mr. Franklin, surrounded by his family, including Sarah and Jack, who were now an integral part of it, raised his glass. To truth, justice, and family love. May our legacy be one of integrity and compassion. As everyone toasted, Whiskers jumped onto Mr. Franklin's lap, purring contentedly. Buddy, not wanting to be left out, rested his head on Lucy's knee. The sun was setting over Springfield, bathing the city in a golden glow. It was the end of an era of secrets and the beginning of a new one, full of hope and possibilities. The Franklin family had faced betrayals, dangers, and shocking revelations, but emerged stronger and more united than ever. Their story, which began with a mysterious rescue on a lonely road, had become a testament to the power of family love, redemption, and the courage to do what's right. As night fell, Springfield's lights began to twinkle, like stars on earth, symbolizing the new light of truth and hope that the Franklin family had ignited in the city. Their adventure had ended, but their legacy was just beginning.